Hey everyone, Parallel here. Welcome to Star Trek Online. So, there are some major balance changes coming to space combat in Star Trek Online. Looks like Cryptic is wanting to shake things up a bit. Now, we got some of the details. They were just released to a patch on the Tribble server, and the patch notes are out. What I'd like to do in this video is go through some of the details, maybe hit the highlights of these patch notes, because the patch notes are quite extensive. There are dozens and dozens of changes here. So I'm not going to go through everything, but I did want to hit some of the high points and let you guys know what is going on here. And maybe start a little bit of a discussion. I'd be interested to know in the comments down below what all of you think about these changes. And I will, of course, give you my take on it as I'm going through the patch notes right now. And let's just say there is a lot of heated discussion going on on Reddit, on the official forums about these changes. So it has definitely sparked a lot of interest in the community. So that's part of the reason why I wanted to make this video. This is a very hot topic right now. So before I dive into the specific changes, I did want to just mention one thing here. As you can see, my character is using some new weapons. These are the Furiadon Fangs. These are the reward from the recent 2017 Breach event, which if you had been participating in this event, you will have recently got your hands on these if you have been doing the daily quest. So now I am not much of a person for doing a melee ground builds. I know very, very little about melee ground builds. So I'm not going to do really a build video or anything, but I thought I would at least show off the visuals of the weapon, just so people know what they are. These are basically a Voth weapon, because of course you get them from the Breach event, so that would make sense. They do seem to have some unique animations. I'm actually not sure if these animations are used anywhere else. So I'll show these a little bit in action down here in Kobali Prime, just so you get an idea of what the the basics of the weapon are, how they look. They do look fantastic, don't they? Very nice looking weapon. But yep, so we'll take a look at the animations and whatnot, but I'm not really going to go into the build or anything because I don't really have one. I'm not much. The closest I ever got to a melee build on the ground was using the Zephram Cochrane shotgun. So yeah, that's about as close as I get to melee range on my characters. So now, let's get into the patch notes here while I'm messing around with these weapons. Because, yeah, the main point here is to go through all of the highlights. There are just so many big changes here. So maybe where I'll start is just give general impressions overall of what I think of these changes. These, because it looks like Cryptic is really trying to shake up the current meta. Now, I mean, there's just so many changes to so many parts of space combat. It is, it's almost hard to comprehend. We're really gonna have to do a lot of testing on Tribble, and even once it goes live, to figure out how everything is gonna shake out with these changes. But let me just say that based on what I've been seeing on Reddit and from people doing testing on Tribble, these changes are huge. I mean, we're looking at pretty significant, 20%, 30%, even 50% damage decreases on meta builds. So this is no joke. These are significant changes. And it makes me think that Cryptic is really trying to get power creep under control here. With this, with this amount of damage reductions, let's go ahead and use these in combat here. Yeah. So, yeah, these changes are so sweeping and so significant, it really makes me think Cryptic is trying to bring down the power creep, right? That could be... That's only the explanation I can think of. Now, just as a general philosophy, I don't think power creep... Wow, that's pretty cool effects. Check that out. They got kind of a cool glowy lightsaber effect going on after you do the melee attacks. But, yeah, these changes, though, holy cow. Now, as a general idea, I don't think power creep is necessarily a bad thing, right? I mean, power creep is pretty much existing in all MMOs to one degree or another. Especially MMOs like Star Trek Online, where you have a lot of vertical progression, and you have to feel like your character is getting more powerful, right? That's very key to progression in vertical MMOs. So, I mean, yes, that does lead to things like power creep, but to some extent, it's almost needed. You need to feel like you're making progress. So, in and of itself, I don't think power creep is a bad thing, but I think what's been happening in Star Trek Online is that the content has not been keeping up with the power creep. And I think Cryptic at this point is saying, the power creep has gotten so far past our content, we need to bring things back in line. I mean, that's my only explanation for this level of changes, all at once. So I think that's kind of, just at a high level what the philosophy is here. Now, I will say I'm not a huge fan of having massive balance changes all at once like this. I think it's a little bit of, I don't know, I guess a little bit of an outdated, I don't know if that's the right word, but it's a little bit of an outdated philosophy. I prefer the more modern philosophy that like a lot of MOBAs are using nowadays, or even like Overwatch and whatnot, where they do much more frequent but smaller balance changes, where they'll have a little patch and they'll adjust a hero or a champion by like 10%, and then they'll see how that change shakes out, and then they'll maybe that nerf was enough, so they nerf them another 10% and see how that change shakes out. So it's more of like an iterative more of an iterative process that allows players to adjust a little bit more gradually and actually see how things shake out before doing any drastic changes. Now, that's definitely not the philosophy with this patch. This upcoming patch with the space balance changes is going to be massive. I mean, so many systems are all changing at the same time. It's really hard to know what the overall effect is going to be across your entire builds. So, yeah. So I'm not a huge fan of this method of balancing. I prefer more iterative, smaller balance changes. But it is what it is. All right. So I've been having a little fun here. These weapons are definitely a lot of fun if you like melee ground builds. But very cool effect. But yeah, so that's this in action. But let's. I'm gonna go somewhere more comfortable here. Maybe head to my starship's bridge, and let's start going through the patch notes in detail. Now, yeah, let's sit down and get comfortable here, because there is a lot to go through. There are some big changes, a lot of things being affected. So. First thing I just want to mention, because there's definitely some very positive changes in this, with this balance patch. There's going to be some great additions, but I also have to say, at least from my opinion, there are some very negative changes, and some changes that are really going to get a lot of resistance from the community. Yeah, so we'll get into all of that. But I just want to mention one thing that Cryptic specifically said in the original blog that they posted on this, which is, I'm going to quote it here, part of their philosophy is, quote, player investment retains value, end quote. I agree, that is very important. People invest a lot of time, a lot of resources, both real money, in-game currency, dilithium, everything into their upgrades. So it is very important that player investment retains value. Now, I will say there are, in a few cases, I think that philosophy was not adhered to, because there's some of these patch notes that I don't fall in with that particular statement. So right, so let's start getting into the nitty-gritty here. Let's start with some of the positive changes, shall we? Because there are definitely a lot of positive things here, even though, like I said, they overall are nerfing damage output pretty much across the board. But there are definitely some good changes sprinkled in here. So, Let's see, where to start. Okay, so here's a good one. I do have the patch notes up here next to me. Like I said, I'm not going to go through everything, but I'm going to hit some highlights. So this one is a highlight for me. This is kind of a minor thing, but it is positive. They said they're going to add an account reclaim to the dilithium store for, I don't know why my character just stood up, but to the dilithium store, there's going to be an account reclaim now for starship traits, in particular starship traits that are faction specific. I think this is fantastic because there are some starship traits, particularly on Federation ships. Obviously, Federation gets a lot more ships than Klingons and Romulans, and the traits on those ships are difficult to obtain on other factions. So they are adding a lot of those specific traits will be in, they'll be added here to the dilithium store, something similar to like the reclaim area here. Maybe they'll be able to reclaim traits from, from ships that you have earned on different factions. So that is fantastic. Now, they did give a little bit of a list of what these traits include. Things like improved polarized hull. What are some other good ones here? One that I thought was great is emitter synergy will be available. I think that's the trait from the Scryer, which is a good exotic damage trait. That would be nice to be able to get on your KDF or Romulan tunes. So this is a great change. Fantastic change. One thing that I noticed in the list, I don't see anything that are any of the traits from lockbox ships. So it's not all inclusive, which is unfortunate. It would be really great if some of the traits like Invincible or Supremacy, if you earn those on one character, if you could claim them on the other characters through this method, that would be excellent, but it doesn't look like it goes that far. But still, very positive change. Very nice, be great for alts, and it'll really help you get traits on all of your characters a lot easier. Another positive thing, carrier pets. Carrier pets are getting a major buff across the board, so this is going to be great. There's lots of good buffs. It says they're buffing damage, they're buffing the AI to be more responsive. That is absolutely needed. I really hope that the AI changes will make it so the pets can keep up with you at full impulse. That is absolutely needed. They're also giving some great new abilities here, including immunity to warp core breaches. That is also fantastic. That will help your pets survive so much longer. We all know, particularly fighters, anytime a ship dies, I swear they're like magnets. They will immediately head towards the warp core breach and die. So great changes here. Now it looks like they're also adding an ability here where carrier pets will get a periodic immunity to torpedoes every 30 seconds. That's kind of cool. So they'll also get just buffs across the board to damage, hit points, power draining, shield healing. The other carrier pets that did have scratch the paint, they'll get some other little minor buffs to help compensate for that. Now that basically every hangar pet is going to be immune to warp core breaches, so that's a nice little consideration there. I'm hearing really good things about this from people who have done testing on Tribble on Reddit, from the streaming that I've seen. Looks like carrier pets are getting a huge buff, so that's going to be great, guys. So break out your old carriers, break out your Narcine, break out your old Jem'Hadar carriers. I'm even happy because I've been doing a lot of testing on the multi-mission explorers, the tier 6 Vestas, and they all have a hangar bay too. So I'm kind of curious to see how these pet changes are going to work. I'd love to see my Yellowstones being a little bit more intelligent, flying around, not dying all the time, and doing some work. So good stuff. Excellent changes on carrier pets. That might even shake up the meta a little bit, make carriers just generally more desirable across the board. So good stuff there. What are some other changes now? Well, I guess I probably shouldn't beat around the bush any longer. I might just want to go into the elephant in the room. and talk about some of the changes I don't think have quite, let's say, lived up to the philosophy of maintaining player investment. So let's talk about the elephant in the room, and that is this right here. You can see I've got 5 of them slotted. That's right, they are nerfing plasma generating weapon signature nullifier consoles. These are, of course, the plasma explosion consoles you get from the Romulan embassy. They have been meta for years, and they are getting nerfed. They are getting nerfed. The damage from the explosions is getting massively nerfed. They are getting nerfed in proc rate, so they proc per cycle instead of per shot. And on top of all that, they no longer penetrate shields. So they are getting the triple nerf. This is massive, and yeah, this one I think is probably one of the most controversial changes in the entire patch. Now, from what I'm seeing from people on Tribble is this is literally a 97% nerf to these consoles. That's literally taking these from best in slot to not worth slotting. So, man. Now, like I said, I'll give my take on these. I don't want to be too negative here, but what can I say? This is too drastic of a change. It really is. How can a 97% nerf be justified? Just going back to the gaming philosophy here, I prefer smaller iterative nerfs, like I said. They could have been nerfing these, Cryptic does patches every week. Just, nerf it by 10% in the patch. Look at the metrics. Look at player response. Does it get you where you want? Nerf it another 10%. Look at player metrics. See how it shakes out. See how parses are doing. Just do iterative nerfs. This 98% nerf it's just huge. It's going to, it's just going to change so much for these consoles that I don't see how it benefits the game. Now, yes, I know a lot of people are going to say that plasma consoles have been OP for a while, and I can agree to that to some extent. But 98% nerf? Come on. Even if you're looking at the rest of like I said, DPS across the board is going down, so it makes sense that if Cryptic really is trying to cut down the power creep across the board, make PvE content more difficult across the board, then yes, plasma consoles probably need to be hit, just like everything else is getting hit. But 98%, that really makes them not worth slotting, and I don't think that helps. Another of the goals they mentioned in the patch notes was increasing player choice. Nerfing these into the ground doesn't increase player choice. That just takes this choice away. These are literally not going to be good consoles in any circumstance. So this choice is gone. It's very obvious people will probably move over to the research, the consoles from the research facility. So yeah, I don't think it helps player choice. So, and let's face it, it also doesn't help player investment. It does not retain player investment. A lot of people have invested a lot of dilithium into these upgrades, and this does not maintain that value. They need to be at least at a point where these consoles are worth slotting, right? They have to be worth slotting. Yes, maybe they need to be nerfed, but they need to be at least worth slotting. Otherwise, player investment is not maintained, and that goes against their philosophy, Cryptic's stated philosophy for these balance changes. So, yes, this is too much. They need to be adjusted. Hopefully, I can only hope that these get changed, on Tribble as the feedback comes in. There's obviously some simple changes that could be done to bring these back up. Maybe, the triple nerf was probably a bit much. Maybe just 1 or 2 of those nerfs should be should be sufficient. Just honestly, just making them not penetrate shields is probably that's a pretty huge nerf right there. And maybe just a overall decrease to the damage could make them more balanced without making them so bad they're not even worth slotting. So So yeah, let me know what you guys think about this change in the comments. I think this one's most controversial, and I think it does in fact go against their stated philosophy for the patch. So I'm hoping they do readjust this. Cryptic should bring these back in line so they are in fact a choice, that they are worth slotting in the future. I mean, it even goes further than that. I mean, if you think about maintaining player investment, you know, these consoles have been so good that in general, just science console slots on a ship are considered better because you can stack more of these plasma exploders in there. This could influence people's buying of ships, you know, actual real money they spent on Zen for buying ships. Like, for example, if they were deciding whether to buy, like, the science variant of the flagships or the tactical version of the flagships. You know, they might actually look and say, you know, this one has more science consoles, and right now science consoles are good, so I should buy this ship. So it really does have a trickle-down effect. I think there is a lot of player investment based on this, and they, you know, if these are nerfed by 98% and no longer worth slotting, that investment is not maintained. So, right. So not to belabor this point, I think I spent enough time on that, but yeah. Cryptic, please just bring these back into line so they are worth slotting. They've got to be competitive with the research consoles. They got to bring a decent amount of DPS, or they got to, you know, have some sort of performance benefit to actually having them slotted. So, all right, so there it is. Plasma explosions, major change, and hopefully we'll see some adjustments on that one as it gets closer to actually coming to holodeck. Now, well, I guess I'm already going through some of the negative changes. Let's go through one more negative change. You can see I've got a console right here. It is called the Plasmonic Leech. This one also got a massive nerf. The power bonus that it provides to yourself has been significantly reduced and no longer scales with drain. So, basically, this console's value has been massively reduced. What I'm seeing from people on Tribble is that, you know, stacking Drain X doesn't help at all. It's no good for Drain builds, and it's almost no good for any build at all. It basically gives you about 5 or 6 power for each subsystem. That's it. And it used to give, what, 16 to 20 to even more than 20 if you had a lot of Drain. So it used to be a fantastic console, and now you're looking at it, is it really worth just a little bit of extra power in each subsystem? Probably not. Console slots are in high demand, and there's a lot of opportunity cost to slotting a console of what else you have to give up in order to be able to slot a Plasmonic Leech. It just doesn't seem like it's worth it anymore. Again, that's unfortunate because players have invested a lot into these Plasmonic Leech. I know recently the cost has been a lot cheaper, but back in the old days, these things were 90 to 100 million energy credits. You had to, on the KDF side, you had to actually purchase a Zen ship to get the Plasmonic Leech, that Nausicaan ship. So again, that's, you know, if it's nerfed down to the point where it's no longer slotting the console, you are not, you know, that's not maintaining player investment, and that's an issue. So I think those are the two big changes that I hope are adjusted. I mean, there are some minor things here and there that I don't think are, that are positive changes for one reason or another. But I think the ones that violate the quote unquote maintaining player investment are the changes to the plasma consoles and the Plasmonic Leech. Whew, so yeah, lots of changes there. But let's go back into something more positive, shall we? Now this one's great. This one is fantastic and has been a long time coming. And this is the changes to Captain powers. This is really, really good. Now, I'm going to go ahead and head up to... Yeah, let's go ahead out into space and take a look at this, because these are the space abilities that are going to be impacted. Now, these changes are great to Captain abilities. Particularly, science and engineering captains are finally getting a long and much needed buff. A lot of they have a couple of abilities that they're adding to or buffing on engineering and science that really, I think, have the potential to bring these maybe not totally on par with tactical, but to very much close the gap. Because right now, tactical captains are just massively above engineering and science when it comes to damage output. It's unfortunate. And it's kind of funny, tactical captains are even better than science captains at doing exotic damage because they just have so many more damage buffs than science captains do. And that's just kind of weird. I mean, tactical captains doing more science or exotic damage than science captains. So that, I think these changes are really going to help with that. So let's go through a few of them here. So let's start with the science captains changes. Now, science captains are going to be getting a new ability, and they're going to change subnucleonic beam to be a bridge officer ability, not a captain ability. So that is actually kind of an interesting change. You could say that is a little bit of a nerf to science captains because they are losing that uniqueness of having the having that sub-nuke beam, and now everyone will have access to it as a bridge officer ability. But what science captains get in exchange, I think, is well worth it. So here it is. So now that they're losing subnucleonic beam as a captain ability, they are going to gain a new ability called Deflector Overcharge. This is awesome. And the best way I can describe this Deflector Overcharge is basically it's going to be basically a what's a good way to do this? I guess it's going to be attack pattern alpha for exotic damage and science abilities. It's going to give you a major buff to exotic damage. It's also going to buff your drain expertise and your control expertise. So that is going to be fantastic. It's going to be, I think, what science captains really needed. It's going to actually allow science captains to buff science damage. Who would have guessed? So that's awesome. Really good change for science characters there. There's a lot of minor buffs across the board. All of the fleet abilities, science fleet, tactical fleet, are all getting some nice little buffs to make them more useful. Now, one thing I should mention is that all of these captain abilities are going to be getting a sort of internal minimum cooldown. So similar to other abilities like, Beam Fire at Will and whatnot, all having, a minimum cooldown. Now the captain abilities will as well. So you will not be able to have as much uptime on, say, for example, Go Down Fighting or, Attack Pattern Alpha, whatever it may be. You're not going to be able to have them up quite as often. There's going to be a forced minimum downtime. So, and that's going to be across the board for science and for engineering as well. So, awesome changes for science. Now, looks like, as far as tactical abilities, there is a couple of small nerfs, probably needed to bring tactical in line again with science and engineering. I think the only one here that I think is kind of significant is they are reducing the duration on attack pattern alpha from 30 seconds to 20 seconds. I'm not sure how I feel about this buff, this nerf. Only because this is more coming down to a game mechanics reasoning here for me. See, in Star Trek Online, let me just say it's not exactly the most responsive MMO out there. So it actually takes a long time to fully buff up your ship. I mean, for example, I have a macro set to activate all of my main buffs. So if I just activate this macro, you can see it took about 6 seconds, 7 seconds just to go through all of my buffs, right? And I didn't even use throw in also attack pattern alpha, radiant subatomic pulse, throw in your attack fleet, throw in probability manipulation. By the time you've activated all of your buffs and you're ready to go in combat, that's almost 10 seconds of animation lock. That doesn't lend itself well to short duration buffs. So I think I don't necessarily like reducing the duration on buffs. And there's something they're also doing with probability manipulation. They're also reducing the duration on that, reducing the duration on attack pattern alpha, and a few other cases. I mean, I understand why they want to do it. They want to, bring these down to make it more, more reactive, or require better reactions from the pilot. I just don't think it fits well in a game with this kind of animation lock and response time, where it takes literally 10 seconds almost just to buff up. So you're already wasting a huge chunk of your buff duration. So I think I think the 30-second duration is kind of perfect for Star Trek Online, just how the game actually plays. The buffs almost need to be that long so you actually have some uptime with them, just because of all of the activation animations and lockouts that you have just to get everything up and running. I mean, if this was more like, say, World of Warcraft, where you have all of these abilities that are off the global cooldown, you can just hit one button and instantly you're buffed, yeah, then it makes sense to have a short duration buff, because that, then it requires more skill to get your rotation and everything within that duration of time. But it also gives you the capability to do it because you hit one button and instantly all of your buffs are active. That's just not how Star Trek Online works. It just takes so long to go through all of just to buff yourself up and get ready. It just takes so long to do that. So, and there's my Yellowstones coming out. It takes so long to do that. I don't know. I just don't like the reduction in buff duration. But we'll see how that shakes out. 20 seconds is still not too bad. You should still have some decent uptime with it, but yeah, it is what it is. All right, so let's keep going here. So that is the tactical changes. There's some other changes here and there to some of the abilities. Also to some of the science abilities, like, photonic fleets getting a little bit of buffing, and so on. So that pretty much covers tactical and science. Let's take a look at engineering. Engineering's getting some nice stuff. In particular, they're getting two major buffs. One kind of minor. There's a minor buff to Nadion inversion. That should help that ability out, but there is a major buff to EPS power transfer. And this, I think, also will really help get engineers back into line with some of the other careers, bring them up to science and tactical damage output. And that is, so what is EPS power transfer getting? Basically, it is getting the ability to, now when it increases your power levels, it will also increase your max power levels. And it also, that max power increase stacks with other abilities that also increase your maximum power level. That means they will be able to go above the 125. That is awesome. That is sweet. That's basically, think of it this way. It's basically an override subsystem safeties. So, right, it's an OSS that engineers get, and they don't need an Intel slot, and it doesn't have the subsystems going offline after the duration is done. All around, that EPS power transfer ability is going to be massively useful. Plus, it still gives the EPS. It still gives EPS, which is also fantastic. So, engineers, nice. I think that new EPS power transfer is going to be a massive buff for engineers, because if you increase the max, that's going to increase your weapon damage output. That's even going to be good for like science abilities, because that's going to increase your aux output. So it's going to be just as good as override subsystem safeties, and now it's going to be even better because it won't have the subsystem offline disadvantage. So engineers, awesome. There are also lots of buffs to other engineering abilities. Now it even looks like Miracle Worker is going to get some pretty significant changes to make it actually worthwhile. The heal is much bigger. It will give you some temporary hit points. So good stuff all around for engineers. So I actually really like this. So now it's kind of like now tactical. Tactical has attack pattern alpha. as they're kind of their mainstay damage buffer. Of course, they also get go down fighting, but that is actually a little more tricky to activate now because it will have that internal lockout, so you won't be able to keep it up near as much. Plus, they are changing it so you won't be able to use it when you have abilities like Invincible still up. So so it is pretty significant limitations on the go down fighting, although they are buffing the damage scaling and the resistances a little bit. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is now each career is going to have their own attack pattern alpha, that will give them that damage buff. Now, tactical will still have attack pattern alpha, but now science will have the deflector overcharge, which will massively buff their science damage output, and engineers will get the EPS power transfer, which will significantly buff their damage output by increasing all of their caps. That's fantastic. I think that will go a long way to making them all kind of become more balanced. What I'm hearing is that yes, tactical are still on top as far as damage output goes, but it has definitely closed the gap, and that makes those science and engineering careers a lot more enticing to play. So good stuff all around. I really like the captain changes. Again, there are some little nerfs here and there in the changes, but overall, I think those are very positive. Okay, let's see. What else have we got going here? So a lot of changes to bridge officer abilities and a lot of just kind of miscellaneous changes. Like I said, I'm not going to go through all of these, but I do have a few I will highlight. Now, first thing, these were they were hinted at in the previous blog, and it looks like they are going to happen, but they are nerfing Beam Fire at Will and Cannon Scatter Volley. Now both of those abilities will have a slight damage decrease associated with them. They will still hit target, multiple targets, but now it'll have a damage decrease and also a accuracy decrease. This had a lot of people speculating if that maybe accuracy modifiers might become meta again. From what I'm seeing on Tribble, that's probably not the case. Most of the parsers I've seen, Beam Fire at Will and Cannon Scatter Volley are having about maybe a 90% hit rate. So it looks like it's, somewhat of a nerf, but not a massive nerf. And that, I think, is fine. I think that's good, actually. I don't mind, like I said, iterative nerfs like that, where it's just a small change, see how it shakes out, I think is a good idea. I don't think it'll bring back accuracy as a modifier per se, and I haven't seen any testing yet to see if the accuracy overflow works on these abilities now. I mean, for a long time, accuracy overflow never worked on Beam Fire at Will, so I don't know if this change is going to affect that. I think that would be required if accuracy were to become meta. But even then, I think it'll more lend itself to, for example, maybe having some traits that improve accuracy. I think it'll really help the new Kara trait if you're using Aux Power configuration offensive. That already gives you some accuracy there. Of course, there are some skills. This might make skills like targeting expertise a little more useful for the accuracy. So I think you'll probably be able to get enough accuracy through other methods that I don't think it's going to bring back accuracy as a meta modifier on your weapons itself. But I think that's okay. I mean, making some of the stats, accuracy is in the game for a reason, so I think it's fine to make that apply to the AoE abilities. I was actually a little bit worried initially when I heard they were nerfing Beam Fire at Will, that it was going to be a severe nerf, but this looks like a pretty reasonable nerf that kind of fits the philosophy that they're going for. I know a lot of people think, again, Beam Fire at Will is a very controversial topic. A lot of people think it destroys the game, it's too easy. My only counter to that is that one thing Beam Fire at Will does do is it allows a lot of ships to be useful that were not before, particularly cruisers. I know back in the days when Beam Fire at Will was not great and cannons were king, basically everyone called this game, escorts online, because escorts were the only viable ship, because cannons, so massively outperformed everything that that's what people went for. So having beam fire at will being good and perform well makes it so a lot of ships like heavy cruisers, I mean, where would a lot of cruisers like the Galaxy X and the Excelsior, those, if those didn't have beam fire at will, they would be really, really down on the ranks. So as far as damage output, so I like the fact that beam fire at will does, you know, make a lot of ships, slow turning ships, a lot more viable. Because it's good. It's good to have a variety of ships, right? You don't want to just be escorts online. So I like that cruisers are viable, and I think beam fire at will is an important part of that. So I don't want to see it go away. I also do like that cannons. You know, cannons are coming back into the meta too. So you know, we'll see how that shakes out with the cannon scatter volley getting those same adjustments that beam fire at will is getting. Yeah, so I mean, so they are getting nerfed, but it seems, at least from what I'm seeing on Tribble, not too massive of a nerf so far. There are also significant buffs to beam overload and cannon rapid fire. So those are getting significant buffs that might actually make them situationally useful. I mean, those abilities did need some buffs for sure. I mean, it was kind of crazy that Beamfire at Will and Scatter Volley were almost outperforming them on single targets, you know, let alone the AoE capabilities. So it's good to see those get some buffs. I have not seen much testing on those yet to see if they are good, but we'll see where that goes. What else have we got here? Oh, yes. Something you see on my bar here is getting a major buff. And let's see. Yeah, this one right here. Targeting shield subsystems. Well, all of the targeting subsystem abilities are now becoming a duration-based buff that affects all of your shots for that duration, rather than the way they used to be, which was just one shot. Upgrade your next attack, like a beam overload. So this actually has some interesting potential, because these abilities, these target subsystem abilities, have been garbage for so long. I don't think most people forgot they even exist. I mean, most of your science ships, and a lot of carriers too, also have these abilities. And if these abilities become useful, I think that's great for the game. In particular, now that these are duration-based, for that entire duration, now you have a chance to proc the enemy's subsystems going offline. And that means, so for example, targeting shields, that means you could take their shields offline completely for, you know, a pretty significant amount of time. That's actually could be very good, especially for, like, say, a torpedo build, like a Psi Torp build with targeting shield subsystems, bring their shields down with this and then launch some torps. That would be a fantastic combo. So that's a really good change. I really like that they are buffing the target subsystem abilities to be an actual duration buff instead of just the next attack. So good stuff. Let's see, what else is going on here? They are adjusting power systems, how they scale a bit. In particular, the weapons power subsystem is going to be seeing some changes. From what I am seeing on Tribble testing, this is not going to be a major impact, but basically the idea is that if you are at 100 power, you can see my power levels right here. I'm at 112 right now. That's, you know, without plasmonic or anything else. But if you're at 100 power, it should be basically exactly the same as it is today. But if you go above 100 power, it's going to be a slight nerf into the scaling. But if you go under 100 power, it's going to be a slight buff so it won't reduce as much damage by going below 100. From what I've seen on Tribble, it's not a huge difference, but it is something to be aware of for sure. So it means that overcapping probably will be not quite as good as it is, you know, currently today on live. And it's a little bit unfortunate, especially with, like, now the engineers are getting the EPS power transfer buff. That's going to be huge. It won't be quite as good, honestly. Being able to having an extra 25 power to your subsystems won't be as much of a buff as it is in current play, but it still should be a good buff. So we'll see how that shakes out, but just something to be aware of there. Okay, here's another change that I highlighted that I think This one I actually don't like for a couple of reasons. This one is hot restart powers are going to be getting an internal cooldown of 60 seconds. That is going to be a pretty significant nerf to the Iconian set, because a couple of the Iconian pieces, like the Warp Core and the shields, come with that hot restart ability. That's actually really, really good. Part of the reason I love the Iconian set is because when you're fighting Tholians, you know, they always bring your subsystems offline, particularly weapons, and it's annoying, it's a pain in the butt. And even if you're running Engineering Team, which will bring it back online, that's got a cooldown, and it's just a pain in the butt. So it was really nice to have the Iconian hot restarts for fighting particularly some enemy factions. And it also worked with other things. It worked well with like OSS, because it would bring... if your weapons went offline because of OS, this would, would hot restart and bring them back. The Warp Core would. So what they're doing is by giving these an internal cooldown of 60 seconds. I mean, I understand the reasoning why they wanted to nerf it, because it is very good to have the hot restart. But I don't like internal cooldowns like that, because it's sort of, you can't play around it. These 60-second cooldowns are invisible. You don't know when they're up. Let's say you are running Engineering Team and a subsystem goes offline. You don't know, has this ability triggered in the last 60 seconds? Is my hot restart going to take care of that system going offline, or do I got to blow my Engineering Team to do it? It's just the system doesn't work well enough. The internal cooldown system is not transparent enough to make you be able to make intelligent choices and to make it engaging gameplay, to know whether you need to actually use your abilities or whether the hot restart's going to work, that kind of a thing. So it's I don't like this change. I'm hoping they at least roll this back, or at least reduce that lockout, because 60 seconds is an awful long time. It's it's a cooldown that you need to be aware of, and you're just not going to be aware of it. So I don't like this change. Just from a gameplay standpoint, I don't think it fits well with how the actual gameplay and the mechanics. So there's another change there. They are adding some other internal cooldowns / lockouts. They are going to add now holds and disables when you apply them to an enemy. Will now give that enemy an immunity to holds and disables for a period of time afterwards. I think these are more focused at PvP. Obviously, this kind of thing does actually make a lot of sense. This is, a lot of other MMOs use this kind of a diminishing returns effect, where you can't keep someone perma crowd controlled. I think that makes sense. It's an okay change. Another thing they're doing is also another internal cooldown. Again, I'm not a huge fan of internal cooldowns, but in this case, they're adding it to immunity abilities. So there are a lot of immunity abilities out there that give you like 5 or 10 seconds of immunity when you activate an ability. There's traits out there that do it. And there are some pretty crazy builds you can do. I've seen some people getting upward of 30 seconds of immunity, which is kind of crazy. So that, I understand this particular change. Like I said, I'm not a huge fan of invisible internal lockouts, but it kind of makes sense in this case because, immunity cheese was getting a little bit out of hand, and I think it'll help PvP to not have people immune for such a long duration. So, good change. What else we got going on here? Yes. This one is an interesting one, and I'm very curious to see how this plays out. So you can see here I am actually, recently I have become a Canon user. I just did my Canon build for the Tier 6 Vesta, and I'm enjoying them quite a bit. So this change is going to affect Canons quite a bit. This change is, Cannons now have a firing cycle of 5 seconds. All cannons now and turrets will have a 5 seconds firing cycle. That's actually really nice because that will actually bring it in line with beams, which also have a 5-second firing cycle. But now that all the cannons and turrets will have a consistent firing cycle with themselves, it'll make it much easier to time your abilities like cannon scatter volley and whatnot. It will keep all of your firing cycles synchronized a lot better. So I think this is an excellent change. But I do have a few concerns about it. In particular, if all cannons have the same firing cycle now. What is the difference between dual cannons and dual heavies? Because dual heavies used to have just a 1 second firing cycle, or sorry, 3 second firing cycle, but it'd have 1 second of firing and then 2 seconds of downtime. Whereas dual cannons would have 2 seconds of firing and 1 second of downtime. And that's, that actually led to some differences in how they two perform. But how is that going to affect, dual cannons versus dual heavy if they have the same 5 second firing cycle? So I'm assuming it would be 4 seconds on, 1 second off. So we'll have to see how that shakes out. If that's the case, I don't see much distinction between dual cannons and dual heavies anymore. Obviously, I don't know. Maybe they should just get rid of it and merge it into one weapon type and or give dual cannons some kind of an advantage, since dual heavies obviously do, they do have more damage output. They have that innate 10% crit severity, which in fact, actually, believe it or not, in the patch notes, that crit severity is now fixed. For a long time, that crit severity would not apply when you were using weapon skills like cannon scatter volley. You wouldn't get that 10% crit severity buff on the dual heavies. That's being fixed. So with that being the case, it kind of leaves me wondering what if dual cannons will have a role now. And it'd be unfortunate if they don't. So I think they should either merge it into a single cannon type, or make some distinction between dual cannons and dual heavies. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But I like the idea of having consistent across the board firing cycles. In fact, this could even open up some interesting builds with like combo beams and cannons. Something that's kind of frowned upon right now, but if your beams and cannons are all in the same firing cycle, it would make it a lot easier. You could combine maybe an interesting build, with beams and cannons. Could be something interesting to look at. But so nice little change there. I like that one. Okay, here's another one. This one I'm a little bit more conflicted on. I'm not sure if this is bad or good, but it's another one I think that probably went a little bit too far. And that is an ability that I'm using right here, Feedback Pulse. This is getting a pretty major nerf. Feedback Pulse will be going... So basically, the return damage on Feedback Pulse will no longer crit and will no longer get any damage buffs or benefit from damage buffs. Basically, hugely nerfing the damage output of Feedback Pulse. Now, I understand, yes, Feedback Pulse was considered one of those OP abilities. It was returning too much damage, particularly in PvP. I think that's what's kind of the motivation behind this nerf, but I don't know. I think it went maybe a little bit too far. See, the thing I like about Feedback Pulse actually made some unique builds viable, in particular aggro tanking. Like, that really brought up the damage output of aggro tanks and made them really good. It was actually nice to see aggro tanks come back into the meta, and I think Feedback Pulse was a major part of that. Unfortunately, if they nerf that way down, it'll make things like, a Delta Prime attack pattern Delta Prime, and make that less useful. I think you'll see less aggro tanks in the game, which is unfortunate, because that's a really fun build, and I'd hate to see it go because of the nerf to Feedback Pulse. So I'm kind of of two minds about this. Yes, maybe it need to be brought down a notch, but I think it went a little too far. It maybe needs to be balanced out a bit. The way it is now, from what I'm seeing on Tribble, is the damage output is so low, it's just not worth slotting anymore. Unless, I could see maybe it might be worthwhile to keep a Feedback Pulse 1 slotted just so you can activate the trait Improved Feedback Pulse, which does give a nice crit severity and chance buff. And there are other traits like... there are other traits out there that also, yes, like this one, Particle Feedback Loop. Like whenever you use an exotic damage ability, will activate this trait, and when you activate Feedback Pulse, that does count as an exotic damage ability, so it will start stacking up traits like this. So that's the only use I would see for Feedback Pulse after these changes, after the patch, would be to activate traits. The damage output that it puts out itself will be very, very minimal, and so I think maybe that went a little too far. And I'd hate to see some of the more unique builds be removed from the game because of over nerfing feedback pulse. So yeah, I guess that's where I come down on that one. Got a couple more bullet items here I wanted to look at. Let's see, next one. This is just kind of a general thing across the board. Like I said, I'm not going to go through everything, but a lot of science powers had their base damages nerfed. Gravity Well, DRB, Destabilizing Resonance Beam. Tychon's Rift actually got some interesting buffs. But a lot of abilities out there, even a lot of ones that I use, like Entropic Redistribution, they all got damage nerfs across the board. But that said, testing still needs to be done. From what I'm hearing on Tribble is, particularly for Gravity Well, the nerf is not very significant because they're changing also how some of these abilities scale with Aux Power and how much they benefit with Aux Power. So it might not, a lot of these exact damage abilities might not change that much. This is something that just needs a lot more testing to know if it is going to be a major nerf or not. I hope not, because I'm actually looking forward to dusting off my Science Captain alt, which, with that new deflector ability for science characters, plus, going with like a pure exotic build, I think it'd be a lot of fun with science characters. So hopefully they won't nerf science abilities too much. Right. So yeah, just don't jump to any conclusions on all of these science out there. I mean, there's literally 10 plus science abilities that are all say their damage was reduced, but again, it might not actually impact that much in game once you account for Aux Power and everything else. So, all right. Let's see, a few more here. Entropic Rider. So this got a bit of a nerf. I actually didn't even know this, honestly, to tell you the truth. I know Entropic, let's go over to Temporal Spec here. Entropic Rider. This actually parses really well, and it's part of one of the strengths of the Temporal Operative Specialization tree that makes it compete very well against, like, say, Intel. Because Intel, gets flanking and some other nice little things. But Entropic Rider from the Temporal Operative kind of made up for that. So I thought that was pretty balanced. But basically the nerf that's happening with Entropic Rider now is that it will now proc per cycle instead of per shot. I didn't actually know that it was per shot. So I can't say I'm a fan of that change either. I thought Entropic Rider, while good, was not like blowing me away on the parses. So I don't know. We'll see how that shakes out. I still think Temporal Operative will still be an excellent tree, especially with science damage still being hopefully up there and being viable. I think it'll be very fit well with Temporal Operative as a spec tree. So yeah. One other change here. Override subsystem safeties getting a pretty significant nerf. I don't have any Intel seats on this ship, but I do have some ships that I do run OSS on. It is a very good Intel ability. And basically what's happening is now when the ability wears off, it is going to give you a 5-second subsystem offline. It's a random subsystem, but now the 5 seconds offline cannot be cleansed. That means your hot restart won't work. That means your engineering team won't work. So you're looking at 5 seconds of downtime. If that takes your weapons offline, that's a full firing cycle you lost because of override subsystem safeties. That, I don't want to say it kills the ability, but I think for me, it almost does. That, not being able to cleanse it, even with an engineering team, it just really kills it. I mean, you're going to lose a full firing cycle of damage, potentially. Yes, I know OSS is really good for the duration while it's up, but you are going to lose a ton as soon as it wears off. So, another change that I really just do not like. I kind of liked the fact that you could cleanse it. Made it slotting, like an engineering team, great on an OSS build. You could time it when your OSS would wear off, use your engineering team, and be right back in the fray. There's a little bit of skill and timing involved there. So I'm not a huge fan of this one. I think they should at least maintain the fact that it could be cleansed to allow for that reactive gameplay. I think that's fine. So So another negative change. So let's leave it off here with the changes to the skill trees. Again, a lot of other minor changes here that I'm not gonna, I just don't have time. Already this is going to be a long video just with the more significant changes, because there's just so much in this patch. But this last one I want to talk about is the changes to the ultimates in the skill tree. And I'm going to scroll down here just so I can make sure I see the details, because they are changing, in particular, the ultimate abilities. Yeah, so let's talk about each one here. First of all, probability manipulation is getting a nerf. The science ultimate is getting a nerf. It is going to now, in particular, if you know, when you unlock the science ultimate, you know how you have the modifiers. The one they're getting rid of is probability window, that increases the duration. That is very, very unfortunate. This kind of goes along with what I was saying earlier. I don't like when they reduce the duration of these buffs, just because of how the game actually plays out. There's so much animation lock, so much time just to activate your abilities, that you need long duration buffs and actually, to actually get some use out of them. So I don't like that change. It's unfortunate. They are adding a new modifier, so instead of probability window, now you will get probability collapse, which gives a accuracy defense buff. Maybe that'll be decent with the changes to Fa. That extra buff might help get you back up to 100% accuracy on Fa. So it's not necessarily bad. I don't know. I just don't like them getting rid of the duration. Maybe they can increase the base duration slightly to bring it to kind of mitigate it a little bit of getting rid of probability window. That's kind of what I would like to see. But yeah. So that's the changes to probability manipulation. Let's see, what else? EPS corruption, the engineering one. Honestly, it looks like they're trying to buff it a little bit, but I don't think it will be very good. The change is now you will get, so what are the mods in this one? Enhanced corruption will now be part of the base. Oh no, sorry. The damage increase from enhanced corruption will now... Let me see if I'm wording this correctly. The damage increase from that portion from Enhanced Corruption will now be part of the base ability, and now Enhanced Corruption will do something different, or will now be called Ablative Corruption, which will set the target's hull regeneration to 0 and half incoming healing. In PvE, not very good. Maybe in PvP could be kind of interesting. It's kind of like a healing debuff. For focus firing down a target could be decent. But yeah, still very situational. I don't see a lot of people going for the engineering ultimate. Focus Frenzy, which is the tactical ultimate, is going to get a couple of changes as well. Focus Frenzy. So one nice thing is now the buff can be gained by projectile weapons in addition to energy weapons. So torp users, that'll be great. I think they will actually start having some use out of Focus Frenzy. That'll be good. The bonus damage is now only weapon bonus damage. The bonus haste is now only 4% per stack instead of 8. And the cooldown reduction is now 1 second, but only has a chance to trigger each time you shoot the target. The cooldown reduction from frenzy reduction. So, yeah, not quite sure what that's gonna do, because now it triggers each time you shoot the target. Is that making it into a per shot proc? Not quite sure how that's gonna play out. Overall, kind of some buffs, some nerfs to the tactical ultimate. I think overall I probably will still stick with probability manipulation, but that lack of duration is going to hurt it. So I was more hoping they would buff up the engineering one a little more and tactical one a little bit more to make them more competitive with the science ultimate. yeah, the Science Ultimate is just because it's a duration based on yourself is what makes it so good. I mean, the Tactical Ultimate is a debuff on the enemy, so it only lasts for as long as that enemy does, and yeah, so that's why I've always liked the Science Ultimate better. But anyway, those are the changes to the Ultimates, and I think that's probably a good place to leave it. I mean, there are just so many changes in this patch. And even going through some of those highlights there took quite a while. And it's just going to take a lot more testing in Tribble. I get the feeling that this was a whole new branch to their code on the Tribble patch. So this is going to be something that will probably be on Tribble for quite a while. Hopefully they will allow the players to test, give some feedback, and we'll see some changes and get some feedback from the devs and what they think, how they think that the changes are playing out. I really hope some of the more controversial changes, hopefully they will moderate those a bit and bring things into line. I don't think they should make anything not worth slotting, right? I mean, feedback pulse should still be worth slotting. The plasma console should still be worth slotting. The plasmatic leech should still be worth slotting. So I hope they don't over nerf things and they'll bring those things back into line. And if they do bring some of those things into line, if they listen to some of the community feedback and combine that with all of the other positive changes, and particularly the captain changes, which are fantastic, bringing up engineering and science to be a lot closer to tactical, those are all really good changes. If they just iron out some of the more drastic nerfs and bring them a little more into line, I think that will make this an overall very positive change for Star Trek Online. So we'll have to see how it goes. It's just going back to what I was saying at the beginning, it looks like Cryptic is wanting to bring power creep down across the board, and they want to make PvE content more challenging across the board. And that could be a good thing. Of course, the opposite philosophy is they could have just added more PvE content that is hard and actually required having those, having that high DPS output and having all of those consoles and upgrades that you invested into, making them useful because the content would actually require it. But I guess it is obvious that something needed to be done because a lot of the content has become trivialized. So either the content had to get harder or Cryptic had to bring down the power creep. It looks like they've chosen to do the latter with this patch. But as long as they are adding all the good changes and things that are being done to bring, captain abilities in line, making all the careers more balanced, making choices more important, I think those are all good design goals. So, all right, guys, so I think I will leave it there. Let me know down in the comments. I know this is probably one of the more controversial patches. I mean, literally a lot of these things, there's not been any major balance changes like this in over a year, right? Probably even longer than that since anything like Beamfire at Will was changed. So this is definitely going to be a shock to the community. And so I'd like to see what you guys have to say down in the comments below. I mean, obviously, if you disagree with anything I said, let me know. Or if you think the devs are on the right track and, you think that plasma consoles should just be worthless, let me know. I'd be curious to see. All right, guys. Well, that about covers it. Thank you very much for watching. Bye for now.